Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nemo & Co. conference halftime show. I'm not even going to bother keeping him in the green room and then bringing him in because it's Peter Bleakley. You all know who he is. You all love him. So we are back after a wonderful Sunday afternoon session of conference. I really enjoyed last night with Priesthood Dispatches. The challenge is to get more people viewing. Yes, more people need to be viewing this one, though. That was the challenge, right? So he's not watching tonight, so he doesn't add to the viewing figures because he's very competitive. So you all get watching, and we'll show Priesthood Dispatches what's what. But we're also going to be joined slightly later by a mystery guest that I'm very excited about. But first, let's just establish a little bit about Peter, just for those that don't know who he is. Off you go.
Hello, I'm Peter Bleakley. I am the often confused brains behind the Mormon Civil War YouTube channel and podcast, and I live in the southeast of England and am advocating for reforms and change in the church because our membership is falling fast, and I'd quite like to save it. And it's going to be an uphill struggle. So I'm exploring all of that. What are the problems? How can we fix them? And General Conference is always a milestone in how things are going to be over the next while, and whether that's going to get easier or harder to accomplish. So I'm quite excited to analyse what we've just seen today.
Yeah, and me and Peter, the place that we overlap really is that we both form what we call the loyal opposition. Because the thing we have in common is that we oppose certain church leaders. I've been rabble-rousing for this weekend, actually, for people to vote opposed if that's how they feel. In my discussion with Priesthood Dispatches last night, who, by the way, you should go subscribe to if you haven't already, we were discussing opposing votes and just a little bit about his campaign to get people opposing through TikTok as well. So, we both form what we call the loyal opposition. And a keen supporter of that loyal opposition is a man called Doug, who has been so active in the comments section of some of these broadcasts that I thought we have to bring him onto the show. We have to hear his perspective. So he's also been watching conference with us, and I'm just going to throw him into the stream now. Hey, Doug.
Howdy.
Right.
Tell the people at home.
Yeah. Well, I hail from the southeast of the United States, so this is a little less Brit of a show now. You've got an invader.
I served my mission in the
reverse invasion
in the deep south, so I've invaded them first. And I was in the Florida Tallahassee mission in Alabama, and so I adore Doug. We understand each other. I've experienced his world, and it's very similar to Britain. Where the church is in its development, its vulnerability, and the issues going on there. And I'm delighted to have Doug with us, because he represents the reality that a lot of the United States of America is not the Mormon corridor. It is small, struggling congregations in a much larger secular or Christian world, and they face the same challenges that we do and the same vulnerabilities. So it's really interesting to hear how conference is going to impact you and your corner of the world as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Wonderful. So let's kick off, shall we? Just under general observation to begin with, loads of talks about people leaving, loads of allusions to people leaving the church, but no talks about why they're leaving in particular or what to do about it. So it seems like that's an undercurrent. Did you guys notice that at all?
Yeah, I think, they were little hints, trust broken, the internet, a question about church history. So they will drop little hints about what the problems are. But the answer always is, it's your own fault for not trying hard enough. Yeah. If you found these things an issue, and you need to fix yourself and just try and work
that
harder.
Victim blaming is a theme throughout.
Yes. Yeah, it is absolutely, which is a real shame, because the fact that they raise these issues, they know they're concerned, they can never quite break through that glass wall. The last person who did was Dieter Uchtdorf. He laid it out. He said our leaders have done bad stuff and so on, but he got punished for it, and demoted from the first presidency. So that's a clear warning to the others not to go there. So
what did you see, Doug?
No, I see the same thing. I see a reluctance to really address the problems head on. There's just not a lot of answers given other than the internet is bad, or, stay away from Facebook or something like that. So they just kind of have these general things, but there's never really, I like it. By the way, my grandparents owned a Coca-Cola bottling company.
Oh, there we go.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So
it's an American thing I've heard all evening. We're going to keep a tally.
Coke memorabilia.
We're going to keep a tally of the most American things we hear throughout the evening from Doug, and that is currently at number one spot.
That's up there. That's pretty.
There we go. So Gerrit Gong came out, and he came out strong. He had a Nelson quote. The thing we also like to tally: Doug is the inventor of the 3-letter acronym Prophet Butt Kisser, which is a term of derision, for those who basically kiss Russell M. Nelson's butt. And they quote him too much. We have a winner in this last session that we just watched of who did that the most. But thanks to Doug for PBK. That's an acronym we'll be spreading around the internet. So Gerrit Gong kicked us off talking about, as a little boy, he wanted to run away from home. And running from home meant trust has been broken. This talk screamed, "Trust us again, please." And he mentioned church history. And he said, you may think our church hid something somehow or didn't tell the truth. Essentially, to paraphrase it. Well, we know they've hid things. 1832 account of the first vision. That's all you need to say on that, really.
In the safe for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
The most blatant one, yeah.
He also said broken covenants break hearts.
Yeah.
That would be a meme. Yeah. Go on, Peter.
Oh, it is this thing of victim blaming, of it's kind of people think that they didn't understand, or maybe they think it's a church history question. They can't ever say there's actually a valid reason for people to be disillusioned because they got lied to by the leaders repeatedly and intentionally. But he did talk to how congregations need to be when people try to return. He said, be more forgiving, be less judgmental, so that the church is safe for people to come back to. So he was trying to sincerely actually do something about how to deal with it. I mean, it's always, faith crisis is treated by these general authorities always as a mental illness. It's never an intellectual concern that needs truth to answer it. It's always your emotions are messed up, your spirituality is in the wrong place. So the solution is spiritual and emotional. Just love these people, hope they feel a warm fuzzy, it will fix all their questions. That's not what it is. It's simply not. It's about truth, And he then talked about how when returning to a broken relationship, I think he's a bit. This is Gerrit Gong. He's one of the goodies. He's usually really, Christian. So he's not saying people should go back to abusive relationships. So he did say discernment is needed to know when to trust again.
Yeah, he talked about appropriate trust, didn't he?
Yeah.
And that's good. I like that part. That part was good. But somebody who's kind of been going through this faith transition, faith reconstruction, it's really important that you don't feel like you're being blamed, because I didn't ask to uncover unfortunate things, about the church. I didn't ask to have my faith basically shaken by discovering these things that had been obfuscated. And so when they shift that onto you, it just really, it prevents you really from progressing back towards the church if that's what they really want. It kind of has the opposite effect of what they want. So I would say that they need to drop that kind of rhetoric and start talking reality to people, because there's a lot of people out there that are going through this right now.
But instead, they're saying Gerrit is saying things like, "Don't get stuck in the past," condemning us essentially. Look forward to the future. That's what you need to look. So, well, no, actually, we need to deal with our past. He quoted J. Reuben Clark, which I found quite interesting, because J. Reuben Clark is someone I thought they would have wanted to dredge up, because his famous quote, if we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed, is like the ex-Mormon mantra. right?
It's the frontispiece of the CES letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you'd think they want to keep as much heat off him as possible. They don't want anyone Googling J. Reuben Clark at all. But yet they mention him. Just like Dan H. Oakes in one of the previous sessions mentioned Mark E. Peterson, the man who said that black people could only go to heaven as slaves. So, you know, they're dredging up the golden oldies.
Yeah. It's risky. There was a collective sort of cry of "oh really?" in the blog vernacular as soon as someone started their talk with a Mark E. Peterson quote. I've one of my plans for a future episode of the blog of my blog and podcast is to actually just read Mark E. Peterson's sort of booklet and talk presented at the CES training. I think it was in the 1950s, and it's just a racist diatribe.
Yeah,
fascinating. Just to kind of remind people this stuff actually happens. You know, but he carried on for a long time with that kind of line. I
was going to say that the KKK started, unfortunately, in my state. You know, the racial injustice stuff is, really, really kind of a forefront type of topic here, and to have any of that creep back in to any kind of church discussion is just raises the hair on the back of my neck. You know,
I can imagine it's quite worrying for you guys down there.
Yeah,
particularly. Yeah,
we've had way too much of it. No place for it in the church.
No, there isn't. But yet they won't apologize for it. I mean, Matthew Allen in the comments has just said that, don't tell me to repent when the church does not follow its own commandments and apologize for what it now disavows. Absolutely. Yeah. And the problem is someone said they agree with Matthew. The problem is it's difficult when it's Dan H. Oakes who says the church does not ask for apologies and it does not give them, or does not seek apologies and it does not give them, is the same one who then gets to quote Mark E. Peterson. It's like...
I think Derek Gong's punchline, and this was the punchline in loads of these talks, which really struck me, is God will, you can always trust God. Like God is safe. You can go to God, which sounds fine. But the problem is the other half of the time is they're saying the prophet, President Nelson, is the mouthpiece of God, and he is as infallible as God. So in effect, every time they say you can trust God, when they're also teaching you can't trust your own revelations if it contradicts the prophet, what they really mean is come back to Nelson, come back to this prophet president of the LDS Church, because in their system there is no difference. And what he says is God's will, the absolute truth, as he announced this whole conference would be telling us. So they're not nuancing it up enough to give people a way to relate to God in our church, even if they have issues with things that the general authorities are saying. They can't separate the two. So that, sadly, it keeps undermining these pleas to at least trust God. You know, God is, of course, if God exists, infallible and trustworthy. But there's always this fundamental weakness in them saying that, because what they mean is trust us, because I'm also a prophet, seer, and revelator. Trust me, come back to me. And when you know some of them have lied and did in this conference, that makes it awkward.
But then, as Preacher Dispatches says, we've almost gone past denial of change to acceptance of change, because we just say, well, it doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
It's
well, I mean, there was a lot of that as well, with Nelson talking about how there's endless evolution and change, even to the temple ordinances. 10 years ago, no one could have said that, because the line was the ordinances are absolutely sacrosanct. They're the same as Adam received them in the Garden of Eden or afterwards. And they're not changing. Ordinance can't be a thing. So the fact that they've got people used to that level of constant change is extraordinary, because people would have been dragged from the pulpit and burned at the stake 10 years ago if they talked about changing ordinances as an everyday thing that we should always expect. Yeah.
I mean, that was would be as shocking as changing the baptismal prayer or something like that, or the sacrament prayers. You know, it's like, those are things it's an ordinance. It's word for word. Everybody in the temple has to memorize it word for word. You know,
when that circle's getting smaller and smaller, isn't it? that circle of things that are unchangeable is shrinking and shrinking.
Because they have changed the endowment.
What isn't shrinking is the size of the church's bank balance. Which brings us on to L. Todd Budge's talk, where he gave us an update on humanitarian efforts. Do you like that segue? I thought that was quite good.
That was awesome.
That was great.
So he was updating us on humanitarian efforts. But he's confirmed a couple of things here. He confirmed that it is the donations that do charity work, contrary to what Elder Corset said when they were interviewed about Ensign Peak. He used charitable donations as an excuse for the church having the Ensign Peak fund. But what L. Todd Budge has done here very kindly is confirmed what I'd already shared and already told people, which is that it is LDS charities and it is the humanitarian aid donations that go to that, those separate donations from tithing money that do all this. It is those donations. But he was very clever in this talk to clarify that, but then just keep talking about donations and trying to imply that it was people's tithing still. And it was basically a fill the coffers talk. He was like, oh, you've been so generous, please continue to be so generous.
Because we can do more. So he was saying, because of your generosity, we were able to spend more than ever. Yeah. So it says it's still this old pre-Ensign Peak paradigm, whereby the church is penniless. All they have is what the people give each year, and they spend all of it. So if you give more this year, they can do more. There is no other vast pot of money. And this is being said by a man who is sitting on, I mean, some of the estimates where people have, Ensign Peak is an investment fund, very specific, that surplus tithing goes into, about $2 billion a year. And it's now estimated to be up to 140 billion. Like, they made 3 billion during the last 3 months just from interest rates and careful investing. So that we think is gargantuan, but that isn't a fraction of the total assets of the church that are commercial. They also own farmland and buildings and other stuff that isn't part of that portfolio. And there are people who've been trailing through little leads and things, and they're now estimating a possible total commercial asset that they can trace for the church of 400 billion. I mean, it's that gargantuan. And so we're listening to the presiding bishopric of the second level tier of corporate.
And this guy's just come on to the presiding bishopric.
So, when he got the calling, what does the presiding bishopric do? Well, he's being given a budget that is larger than the budget of most of the world's nation states.
What did you say? There's only 40 countries in the world with a GDP larger than the churches.
GDP larger than Ensign Peak alone. And if it's this other number as well, I mean, it's even up there. So we're putting amateurs in and I've done podcast episodes before about how his predecessors didn't even understand what the Great Depression was, and don't understand, and they don't understand the parables they use to justify it. They don't understand the parable of the widow's mite scenario and the parable of the talents. And so he's selling this idea that because they were given more money as humanitarian aid donations, they're able to do more with it. And this is a guy who's sitting on a mountain of gold talking about pennies, as if that makes difference, and not spending the mountain of gold.
And what were you going to say there, Doug?
Well, I was going to say, the big beef with Ensign Peak and the whistleblower who put that out there is that as a charity, the church set that fund up with the purpose for doing humanitarian aid, humanitarian stuff, church stuff. And so if they were just doing what they said they were going to do with the fund, it would be different, but they haven't done any of that. And this guy mentioned 1,500, they have 1,500 projects in 150 countries that he mentioned that. Well, imagine what you could do with the Ensign Peak fund, that goes beyond that. Like, for example,
you could end malaria.
The WHO has been begging for rich countries to give extra vaccines to stop the COVID. In some of these poor nations, they don't have any vaccine because all the wealthy companies have been scarfing it up. And with that kind of money, you could literally supply all the COVID vaccine for the world. They could do something huge like that. Huge.
With a tiny percentage of it. They wouldn't wipe out the asset.
Oh, it wouldn't. No, that's just interest.
But then what are they doing here, Peter? Say it with me. What are they doing here in the UK?
Oh,
they are hoarding
hoarding
humanitarian aid money.
In Britain, the church has to declare its finances to the Charity Commission in order to keep its tax exemption and charity status. So we've been tracking it. They have annual declarations. So every penny that the British saints have donated to international humanitarian aid, which is now over the last 5 years, which is now £4 million, which is microscopic compared to the money they have in America. But this is a huge sacrifice. And my last calling, possibly last calling ever, was Ward Clark. And I'm shoveling the donations of really generous donations of old age pensioners who I know can't really afford it every month into the humanitarian aid fund. They thought it was going to something. It's all still sitting in a bank earning interest. So this was a lie. Because of your generosity, we've spent more than ever. No. And this cross-references as well with the Saturday evening talk by Sharon Eubank, who has been one of the managers of this aid effort. And she said, to all who donate to the humanitarian fund, trusting that it will do some good, thank you. And that was a lie, because she knows that they are not spending the money that was donated, that every penny that the people in Britain donated to that fund, trusting that would do some good, they've been lied to. It's just been turned into another money-making scam. It's charity fraud. And this is outrageous. And she is responsible as well. You know, we need to understand that these spiritual leaders aren't just innocent, sort of happy people giving nice, kind thoughts to people. They are managing budgets, and she was responsible for managing a budget that involves vast amounts of wealth, and they obtain that money deceptively. They are not transparent with how they spend it. They're giving us these numbers in a meeting, but they will not show you a single document tracking that value, although they've now had to put the Enzyme Peak investments in an annual statement, or they release it every quarter now, so you can track that. But just to understand,
but that's not the only fund, you know.
No.
So
no,
it's the one we know about.
It could be the tip of the iceberg. I have to say that this whole Ensign Peak thing, this was one of my shelf breakers, to find out that, because I had believed my whole life that those donations were going to, you know, to build the churches and help the poor people and everything. And you know, we heard talks in General Conference about, you know, how we're not a rich church and things. So I believe that wholeheartedly. It was just an absolute bombshell to find out that kind of wealth had been hoarded, and done nothing literally for decades. And you know, and the church doesn't look like, other than Peter's acknowledgement that there's a statement now, an annual statement. Yeah, but there's no transparency, and that to me is a big issue now. It's like, okay, I just feel like I can't trust that you're going to take my money and do what I think you said you're going to do with it, you know, and really do it. So I would love to see, you know, a law that all charities have to be 100% transparent with their financials.
Like they do here in the UK.
Because humans are in charge of this. I have no idea what they think they can do with $140 billion sitting rotting in the bank. And the video of the presiding bishopric trying to explain, it's for if the stock market crashes. Well, if the stock market crashes, you're not going to have $140 billion anymore. You know, I mean,
you couldn't make up the stupidity.
You could not make it up. Sitting in a room full of mahogany tables with vases,
antique vases,
locked in glass cases that probably worth $1 million. You know, and they're talking about all this stuff. It was just mind blowing.
No clue. And L. Todd Budge revealed, you know, his first thought on being called was, well, what did the presiding bishopric do? It's literally putting people who don't know what they're doing in charge of these vast budgets.
But it's okay because you got to have a lovely conversation with Russell M. Nelson.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's fine.
All these stories of meeting the walking God on the earth. I just want to add one tiny...
Right, cool. Then we'll go on to Anthony Perkins.
Yeah. My last ward, Welling, is older than the church in Utah. It dates from the 1840s. It still doesn't have a chapel. It used to, when I was ward mission leader there, not because of me, the missionaries, it was the top baptizing ward in Europe. We used to have a congregation of 150. It's way down now. They are still meeting in a school out of a cupboard, but the church 25 minutes drive away from where Welling's people, tithe payers who live in social housing projects live. The church shifted £103 million over to the British budget to purchase a business centre in London as a commercial investment called Alder Castle that looks like a temple inside. And that ward is paying for that, is still homeless. That is how egregious, utterly shameless this international exploitation of the poor is, to make vast wealth. And they don't invest, they don't even use that economic power to benefit vulnerable countries, to invest in the global markets, to invest in poor countries. They channel it all into the American stock market. They're making their own country richer, their own people richer. 15 to 20% of all our tithing pays for them to have subsidized education at the Brigham Young universities. It is an imperial colonialist financial system. And these lovely people, this presiding bishopric guy and Sharon Eubank, they are sitting on the top of that pile of corruption and gold. So do not be fooled about their true nature.
They're just like Smaug.
And how much they are lying to us about all of this when they, and El Todd's message was sacrifice, consecrate, give, sacrifice, give us more. They're an insatiable money-making machine, and people need to start holding them accountable for that.
Absolutely. So vote opposed and pay your tithing to local and international charities. Sign my petition. That's going to be in the show notes. Cool. Should we go on to Anthony Perkins? Who made me very uncomfortable, because I found it quite uncomfortable when he just started off by saying, I've got terminal cancer. It's like, okay, great. How? And I'm also sat here watching from a fact-checking perspective, and I'm like, how do I then fact-check a man who's just told me he's dying? I mean, that feels uncomfortable to me. So I don't actually have that many notes. Doug, therefore, I'm going to throw the difficult task onto you to tell me what you thought of his address.
Well, when Anthony Perkins came up, I immediately thought of Anthony Perkins, the actor.
Okay.
The Alfred Hitchcock movie,
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. I didn't. I thought he tried to talk about the fact that that everybody is going to suffer, actually, which is true. I'm a little older, right? So I'm suffering, and I've got aches and pains. This part of suffering is part of life, and he talked a little bit about how to kind of wade through that suffering and not let it get the best of you and drag you down. And I thought it was, pretty good. I didn't have any complaints.
No, yeah.
So
he talked about the universality of suffering, didn't he?
Yeah, he was pointing out sufferers don't sin, which was lovely, a real
good.
comforting message. It's not your fault. Although then lots of the other talks were about, well, God wants you to suffer because you got to learn a lesson from it. And it's so, there's supposed to be some higher spiritual purpose to your suffering. So that was a bit contradictory, which some people following it were commenting on.
But I feel like we could actually just move over onto Michael Dunn pretty quick after that.
They've given up on healing people, though. This is the General Conference Death March. Yeah. It's just the healing now, and this is a message in countless talks in this conference. The healing is spiritual. The healing is helping you to cope with dying or suffering and seeing a high purpose.
It's helping you have the faith not to be healed physically, as Bednar put it.
And they've segued entirely to that now. No one was talking about actually being healed by priest of blessings.
Yeah, and it's kind of this hollow thing about, you might suffer in this life, but then in the next life you'll be okay. Well, that's kind of a hollow message, Just wait till you die and you'll be okay.
It might not happen now. You'll be fine in the next life. And one of the speakers specifically said that. Yeah.
So on to Michael Dunn, who How dare he?
Oh,
For a start. He's not wrong. This is the thing.
Sacrilege.
But the British are the only ones that get to say that we're crap at cycling.
Exactly.
Or we were. He doesn't get to say that.
No.
He was the first use that I heard of the word myopic, which is their new favourite buzzword. He talked about being myopic. He talked about scaring his dad, driving a car. I'm really starting to get fed up with metaphors in this conference, if I'm honest. It's overused. And he talked about Brailsford, who, the 1% rule, the aggregate of marginal gains, all that other thing.
In cycling.
Yeah, what did we think?
Well, this was massively hypocritical, bearing in mind, as one of my listeners messaged me, that the junkie American Lance Armstrong nearly destroyed the entire world cycling industry with his prolonged cheating through drugs. But also there are factual inaccuracies. So David Brailsford's whole method of these incremental changes is now not believed to have been much of a factor. The current medal gold-winning cyclist, well, mainly because he was a bully. He was a sexist bully, was the general consensus.
Hang on. Yeah, I don't hear the problem though, because the church is saying that we're following the example of Martin Brailsford and improving by 1%. So I don't see the issue. It still works in my mind. Sexist
bullying and the false narrative that you can win Olympic golds by making yourself a little bit better every day. Unfortunately, a tiny bit of this is where their phobia for social media kills them, because all he needed to do was Google this guy instead of just remembering someone talking about him in a business training meeting or something. And he would have found all of this. He'd have known that this guy's whole thing is somewhat discredited and been a bit more
The other
informed.
crazy thing is, he was talking about these marginal changes and how they improve us, right? But the church's marginal changes, its inability to improve by more than 1% at a time, is what's killing it.
Yes.
The fact that the church will not move any further forward than 1% is killing the church. And so this talk just screamed to me as a justification of only improving by small amounts. And this is why the church is only changing by little bits at a time.
But it's losing members and failing to thrive in much larger chunks. It's, their tiny incremental solutions don't hack it. And the big build up to it sounded like President Nelson was going to announce something huge and major late. And then he always does this. And then normally, at least you got a logo last time out of it or something. This time, there was literally nothing. I mean, we'll get to it. But it's this idea, every time they look like they're going to do something big, decisive and dramatic, they could chicken out, or they don't have anything that will actually make a difference. And it does feed into this idea of toxic perfectionism, which is another of these themes. That you will get better and better every day. There's no backwards. You must always step forward. Every day you wake up and you're a little bit better, as if our journey is something it is the faith and grace and works thing. You save yourself by effort, suffer, work harder, do more. It's a every day, and it becomes too much. And that's why people crash out of the church, because it's unhealthy and toxic. And they finally realize that it's not working anyway. It doesn't even work.
What do you reckon, Doug?
Well, I have two comments on that. First of all,
go for it.
He did say, I've got my own notes here too. He did say that, applying that one little thing at a time to repentance was a good thing to do, and I agree with that. That a lot of times people they've got problems they're trying to repent of, they just try to jump in whole hog and get rid of it all in one day, and it's not going to work. So I thought that was good, especially the youth. And I've worked a lot with the youth. The youth, they're already going through teenage years. They already have all these struggles we're going through. So having that where it's like, you don't have to be perfect today. You can just take a little tiny bit at a time. I thought that part was good. And let's see what else. Oh, maybe that's the next speaker. That was it, honey. Okay. Just doing that little step at a time on repentance. I thought that was a good.
The only last little bit I have before we go on to Sean Douglas is that he spoke about David trying to take down Goliath, and he just said, there's one small stone, and that's what it took to take down Goliath, but he did have 4 more ready. And I really resonate with that, because I have 1 small stone that I've flung at the church, which is my petition, but I have 4 more ready. I'm getting everyone else to oppose, I'm calling out the leaders on their lying, so you've got to have multiple things in your arsenal. I agree with him. And also he used the phrase, your 1% quest. And if that doesn't become a social media campaign for the church in some way, then they're missing out. Because I heard that and thought, that's marketable. That is.
It's been very slogan and meme-licious, this conference. Absolutely brilliant.
So what do we make of Sean Douglas?
Well, this started well.
Spiritual hurricanes.
Texas hurricanes. I thought it was going to be it got the climate change mention that one of us had in our predictions. So it looked like it was going to really good places, and then it turned into probably the worst talk of the entire conference.
Yeah, when the word foolishness of doubt comes in.
Yes, doubt is the enemy of faith and joy. It just nosedived into when we choose to doubt, we choose to be acted upon, which sounds totally Bednarish. You become a victim. You lose your freedom and control. Satan leads us to the breeding ground of doubts, and it's all warm there. He's trying to connect with the scripture about don't be lukewarm, be hot or cold. But it's saying it's lukewarm. We relax. We don't have to follow every rule. And that's, again, this toxic perfectionism, the idea that the only reason people doubt or have faith crisis is because they want to sin. They want to knock off some of these demanding requirements of the church. And this is one of the talks. In my paradigm, in my podcast, it's Christians versus Pharisees. And this whole conference has been one of the most obvious yet, that there are literally 2 completely different religions being taught by our apostles, the Pharisee religion and the Christian religion. And brilliant Christian talks from to various people along the way. Suarez was incredible.
Uchtdorf was a little bit boring, because it's just you might go off path again.
It was a rehash.
That was a bit blah. And Kapishke talking about mental health, and so which is really one of my young teenage friends actually messaged and posted about how much Kapishke's talk gave him hope for the future of the church, that finally people were speaking to his generation about their real issues. And that really moved me, because this kid is amazing and I want him to stay in the church. And that was his lifeline from this conference. So people are getting the right thing, but then other people get up at the same pulpit and teach the literal opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
So doubt, there's no understanding again here that the reason people have doubt or skepticism is because they find out that you lied to them about a lot of stuff.
Joseph Smith doubted the validity of the churches of his time, and Doug said something great. We had a little bit of a pre-chat banter beforehand. Doug, tell everyone what you said to me earlier about doubt not being something you control.
Well, doubt is it's a reaction. Doubt is a reaction to being presented with information that conflicts with something that you think you already know. Maybe it does, maybe something that you learned that you didn't know, that kind of fills in a gap maybe, and you're surprised at it, and maybe you kind of question that, or it completely contradicts what you've been taught. And that's kind of what I experienced in my faith crisis. The big catalyst for me was reading Rough Stone Rolling. I had grown up with all the stories of Joseph Smith. I love Joseph Smith. I'd been to Nauvoo multiple times. I used to drive up there at least once a summer, before they even rebuilt the temple, just kind of immerse myself in that whole church history vibe. And the Rough Stone Rolling came out. I can't remember how I got turned on to read it. I think it was from an online group. I don't know if you even know what a chat room is.
Sorry, too young.
Or a bulletin board. Do you know what that is? Well, way back then, that's what us computer geeks used to use, right? Before the Facebook and things like that. But anyway, I wound up reading Rough Stone Rolling, and when I finished that book, it was like, who is this person that I just read about? It's like he was a completely unrecognizable person. had a horrible temper, was horrible to his wife. It was just like.
And so a completely natural reaction is to then be doubtful, right?
Yeah, and then I'm like, well, what? Who's right? Who's been teaching me right? Has it been my Sunday school teachers all these years, or is it this guy who won the Mormon History Award for this book? It's supposed to be the most accurate a biography of Joseph Smith ever written, and I read it and it blew my mind.
Yeah. And it only survived because Bushman essentially chickens out at the end and tries and gives it a little spiritual uplift at the end. And because he does that, we get away with it, right? And that's the only reason that book exists. And so in some ways, I'm thankful to him for that, because if it had been of the form Brody nature of just being very direct and not having that sort of feeling of trying to keep people in, then we probably wouldn't have the access to it that we do, and it wouldn't have the credibility it does in Mormon circles. Thank you for that, Doug. I've told 21st Century Saints to turn what you've just said into a meme. The only other thing I have on this is that he talked about Ruby, is this little girl he knows, and he says she has a strong take charge will, and I just wrote, shame she won't get to take charge in the church. Because he's talking about, she's got this really strong take charge will, but what's she going to be able to do with it? Yeah. Peter, did you have anything else before we move on to Carlos?
Just using her as the metaphor. This is a girl who's disabled. I think it's his own daughter, who had a detached esophagus and needed a hand operation later. And just saying, conflating her physical disability or hurricane with faith crisis and doubt is totally inappropriate. My thing I wrote down as a sort of response to it, the thing they don't understand of course they understand it, they're not that stupid, but they can't say it, is healthy, cautious skepticism, which they call doubt or intentional doubt, is an essential virtue. Trust has to be earned. Otherwise you're just stupid and gullible. And it's ridiculous that they keep demonizing doubt. As you said, Nemo, repeatedly, doubt is what led to our church. Joseph Smith doubting what he was hearing from different preachers, if he's to be believed, is what led to him asking questions and seeking something better and different. And again, it's these two opposing religions. As someone commented in the comments, that, in other talks, they were, in a sense, validating doubt as take your questions to the Lord. But it all depends, what do you mean by doubt? How do you define it? It's like the stupid thing they keep saying of honest questions.
Yeah, it's like, are you questioning or do you have questions?
And their idea of honest question is you're not really questioning and you promise in advance to accept whatever they say or can't answer as the answer. I mean, it's just it's the most blatant Orwellian nonsense about what truth even is, how we learn anything, and they're still trying to. I mean, we nearly made it. We nearly got to the end of a conference with no one slamming the doubters and using the word doubt. But this guy, he just went for it. It was the worst talk in the whole conference, the most useless and dangerous and demoralizing. If they've just alienated tens of thousands more Latter-day Saints who are struggling to still love this church despite all the harm it keeps doing them and the nonsense they keep saying about their own lived experience of having questions and doubts, and which are completely valid.
Go on, Doug.
Peter, I just wanted to mention, I think it's highly inappropriate using this 5-year-old girl. This is an innocent little child. This child has no idea what doubt really is, what faith really is. I mean, she's a child, and so using her as an example, I just thought that was really unfair, to bring her into this adult conversation where you're really condemning people that have doubts, and then you use this little girl who can't even comprehend maybe the concepts you're talking about, as your example to kind of rub it in.
Yeah.
So, I didn't like that.
Thank you very much to Joseph the Wanderer there, who's just given us a kind donation. Thank you very much.
Everybody donate. Come on.
Yeah,
Pony up.
thank you, guys. Yeah. Can we move on to Carlos Revillo? I don't think...
There
you go. There's not much to say about Carlos Revillo, I don't think. He didn't even try and crawl inside Russell M. Nelson's bum. The one thing he said to me that stood out was he talked about people from the Philippines having a natural belief in God. And I'm not sure how to feel about that.
Well, it's a bit like when I was in my mission in the Deep South, there was this sense that, the black people are more spiritual because more of them would listen to the missionaries. And what it was socioeconomic desperation, that people are more open to religion when they've got nothing much else in their life or they're really suffering. And in our country, it is a class issue that the missionaries primarily target working class neighborhoods because they don't have the wherewithal or longer term strategies to engage with the middle classes or people who have a higher level of education and so on. So they go for what seem like the low hanging fruit. So this idea that you have today, Africa is the great future of the church and everything's booming. And in his case, he's saying the Philippines, and he's gloating about their growth. They've got 7 temples on the go or about to be built, tens of thousands of members. And I was like, yeah, but how many of them are actually active? Because we know our numbers are huge, but actually less than 15% of the members
800,000 members.
800,000. Yeah. But it's not going to be that many going to church, So there's a bit of denial there. But it's one of the few places where it looks like the church is still having this exponential growth experience. I'm obviously skeptical about it. What really struck me
about it being a miracle that fulfilled the miracle of the Isles of the Sea, which, hate to break it to him, there's more than one set of islands on the planet.
Yes, we're on an island. I didn't even think of that. We're on an island.
Yeah,
dude, we're in there. It's
New Zealand, Australia.
Yes.
Yeah, Japan.
Let's claim it. Yeah,
plenty.
Not going well in any of those islands. So the other thing he said was he talked about his great-great-great-grandfather who gave up smoking and joined the church, and then big family photo.
It was almost a convert story style thing, wasn't it?
It was great. And this is the impact it can have, and that's inspiring. I mean, that used to be the message of the church. You join this church, you will have these generations of an expanding progeny of Mormons. They're all going to go to the temple, they'll go on missions, they're going to become great people. You're going to make your own Abrahamic tribe to be super proud of. But I just looked at that photo and I relate it to my family. I'm in a similar situation. My great-grandmother joined the church. I'm like a third of generation member, which is quite rare in our country. Most of her descendants are active Mormons still. I saw my family reunion picture, but one by one, those people are dropping off. It is eating into even the mainstream sort of strong Mormon culture, multi-generational families. And the reality for the whole church is more than 80% of our young people leave before they're 30. So again, they're selling this idea that if you just join the church and stick with it and do all the things we're telling you to do to your children, which usually alienate them, you will also have this progeny of Mormon offspring. But the reality is, no, you won't. No, you won't. Half of the girls won't be able to marry in the temple. That was something that Nelson or others talked about. Go make the choice, just go marry in the temple. Half of them literally can't because there are 100 active women for every 70 active men. And quite a lot of those active men you don't marry them. They're toxic, So I'm rounding it down to roughly, you've got a chance of a half of the women in the church even being able to marry in the temple. And then more than half of those marriages will end in divorce. That's the real statistics here. And they're still delusionally ignoring all of that data, which they know about. And they've had presentations about it for decades, and still selling this idea that you've got these guaranteed outcomes, that if you just unconditionally stay, with your toxic perfectionism on the covenant path, everything will be fine. And it's just not real. They're selling, and, so that's what really struck me is that his sort of narrative there of exponential growth in his country and having this endlessly expanding Mormon family, it's just not real anymore for most of us. And it's going to get worse if we can't keep our kids. So that struck me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just before we go on to Alvin F. Meredith III, I'd like to say a big thank you to Ron Lewis, who just gave us a very lovely donation. It popped
Very
up on
kind.
screen a little while ago. Thank you very much. That will help the channel. So, Alvin F. Meredith, very much focus on Christ. Apologies, I mentioned a driving metaphor earlier. This was the guy with the driving metaphor. What he said was... The quote he used and then butchered was, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. Satan gets us to do nothing, or just not the things we ought to be doing.
Yeah.
Which is not the quote.
Yeah.
It's not how that works. What are your thoughts, guys?
Go first, Doug.
Yeah, Doug, please.
This one just didn't really resonate with me. If this is the focus down the road talk, and that's about all I wrote down.
Yeah. And what's interesting is actually he's talking about focus down the road because the things immediately around you might distract you. But the argument could be the things immediately around you affect your life the most. And it's about balancing those two things. Like, I wouldn't get in the car with this guy because if all he's doing is looking 3 cars ahead, then if the car in front suddenly brakes, he's going to go straight into the back of him.
Ran over that poor little kid
that
ran in front of the car.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, I was looking down the road. I didn't want to get distracted by the things around me. You know, it's a really poor metaphor.
Sorry,
and by this
sorry,
point,
I squashed your little dog Fido, but I was looking down the road.
Exactly. Didn't see him, sorry. Peter, what you got on this?
I actually kind of flipped this metaphor because one of the joys of General Conference now, which has really surprised me, is when you become more skeptical, you actually start loving a lot of these talks. You're like, yes, you are absolutely right. But the way it applies is to our problem with the church. Like you're not talking to me, you are talking to yourselves here. Will you learn the lessons? So what he said was all it takes is for good men to do nothing and get distracted. And those distractions don't have to be immoral. And I love that because the biggest, as I see it in my analysis, the biggest problem we have in the church is our local leadership class are so busy. They're busy with busy work, doing good, meeting, minister to someone, go and visit someone who's never going to come back to church ever. And while they are busy, they don't have time to study. They don't have time to get on the internet and get informed and get a feel for what's actually going on in the wider online culture in and out of the church. They don't have time to stop and think. They don't have time to strategize to survive. They are too busy, distracted by good things to do. And they're often, but those are the people that people with the doubts and the faith crisis are told to go to get your comfort, answers and reassurance. And they haven't the first clue what to say. They're some of the least informed in our community about what these people are actually going through.
My poor state president is having to deal with my opposing vote right now.
I know, my gosh.
He doesn't have time for it.
No.
It's his job.
Ages. I know. I'm
having to send him another one.
Yeah. So I just feel that actually that was a really powerful point, and it's a point, and it gets to the heart of why this church is dying, because they're too busy, distracted by doing good things that they can't focus on the things that matter the most. And that was the point of Alvin Meredith III's talk.
Well, speaking of things that matter the most, what matters the most is that we use the correct name of the church. That is what Elder Anderson decided that we must focus on in his talk, where he quoted Nelson 6 times. 6 times he quoted.
This was one of my wins.
He gets the PBK award for this.
He is the PBK winner of this.
He always is. But he won it for me because one of my predictions was that the ensign, the Liahona for this month, has got endless articles about how clever and amazing President Nelson was to change the church and dump Mormon. And I was like, this is going to be a theme in conference. Yeah. But he's the only one who mentioned it because he's on
Boy,
script.
did he go for it.
And clearly the ensign staff were told, what the president wants you to do is make sure this is front and center in everyone's mind when they come to conference, but only, and this is where you have to get in your criminology on. So here's the criminology, everyone. I've got my, is only he talked about this and bigged it up. And here's the biggest brown nose there always is. But the tumbleweed from the other apostles indicates once again that they really are not on board with this. They know it's a dumb thing that they did. And listing that more than 1,000 products were renamed just points to the
calling
financial
them products.
Products. It's a business management thing. It's rebranding. So I thought that was fascinating. But
he talked about 220 countries and territories. And I did a quick Google, and there's 195 countries and 2 non-recognized states, according to the UN. So I don't know where these extra 25 countries have come from, or what countries he is subdividing into territories, but it just seems like a weirdly inflated statistic to me.
Those are the collab countries that we've annexed.
It's the Quakers on the moon, their territories, isn't
it? The Moon Quakers.
The Moon Quakers. Yeah.
Oh, but what in a sense was different about what he did was he was also quite bold about acknowledging that it did mean abandoning a lot of our heritage and culture. And I respect him for that. He listed these songs, and I'm a Mormon Boy, the stuff that President Monson would recite and sing from the pulpit not so long ago, till they waited for him to be dead and threw him under the bus. So he at least acknowledged that, and he kind of tried to spin it as there was a time for this. The time was right then. But you can't really say that when they're selling this as an abandonment of the name of Christ. So you know why the time was right? Because the domain names became available. That's what we were told. He basically said, he's like, and miraculously, at the time of Nelson's announcement, those domain names we've been after for years became available. Just
for a price.
Yes.
Well, it's a bit like the miraculous coincidence of the proclamation on the family to legislation in America.
Or the 1978 allowal of black members to go to the temple and have the priesthood has nothing to do with tax-exempt statuses of American universities and the boycotting of sports games. Nothing to do with that. But I can't believe he admitted that. He said that in his talk, that miraculously the domain name became available. Oh, boy. Because at that point, you know exactly why it happened when it happened.
The
other thing that kind of...
They were waiting.
Yeah, go on, Doug.
Sorry.
I was going to say, the other thing in his thought that kind of stood out to me is he mentioned about that, when Jesus comes back, the church is going to be all around the world, and that other Christians are going to see that Jesus comes to us and is going to actually love us,
Yes.
I was like, this is just this weird dystopian view, of things. And then the other thing that he talked about again was the big bad world, and how evil and horrible, it is.
You're so right, because it is this desperation to fit in. And again, he bluffs it all. He always gives away the strategies, Anderson. He's like,
he's that guy you don't tell secrets to or about surprise parties.
No, it will be in the next General Conference talk. He gives it all away. No, you're so right, because he was talking about, I didn't quite catch all of what he said there, but it was this idea of the other Christians will love us, and they keep talking about, and these other ministers are now respecting us. I think Nelson did some of the similar. These are people who grew up as we did under persecution. They grew up in a world where the Christian world hated Mormons, were proactively mobilizing to demonize us in every way possible. And the whole trajectory of the church and the terrible mistakes they made, hitching their wagon to the Christian right politically in America, seeking power rather than social justice.
Thank you, Ezra Taft Benson.
And to fit in, and even people before him, you absolutely see this has always been the end game. We want to be treated as equal. And Nelson was so delighted to have the chance of meeting the Pope and having that photo opportunity. As we discussed before, he built a temple in Rome, which hardly anyone will go to. There's not many members in Italy, and filled it with Catholic kitsch, with Catholic statues of the or not counting the Protestant.
There was a Hall of the Apostles, essentially.
The Hall of the Apostles.
Cross on the door.
And and so you absolutely, they think this is the success, and in doing that, they burnt down their church. they lost millions of members because that was their focus, to just keep playing these culture war games in America. And now it's all blown up in their face because what they thought was a resurgent Christian political powerhouse in America is now imploding under the weight of its own contradictions and irrelevance to the modern age. And the young people in America are now fleeing their churches, which they talked about.
Down in H. Oaks talked about it.
Down in Oaks talked about how the loss of religiosity generally is bad. And that actually brought back a memory when Gordon B. Hinckley spoke to a big conference in Britain years ago. He said we shouldn't be gloating about the decline of Christianity in Britain. It's actually bad for all of us. It's bad for the spiritual health of the nation. And that's one of the first times I'd ever heard one of our leaders actually want other Christians to do well. That really inspired me, and I was getting involved in Christian Union at school at the time. And my view was the same. Christians are now like rare as hen's teeth in our country. We need to nurture them. So as a teacher, I actually started a Christian Union in our school just to give them somewhere safe to come to, having had that myself. And so I get that and I liked that, but it's too late. Too late.
Should we go on to Russell M. Nelson's closing remarks? Or Doug, did you just
go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So the couple of things I found interesting here is that the amount of temples he announced now puts him past the record of temples announced during a prophet's tenure by about 10 temples now. So he's overtaken Gordon B. Hinckley. So that's his legacy. He gave us the warning against social media that we all thought we were going to get. He said that leaving the covenant path will create heartbreak, so that's some more us versus them thinking. And my favourite bit of what he said was when he said, all these leaders have been praying about what the Lord would have them say. Conveniently, most of these leaders said a lot of Russell M. Nelson quotes. So what the Lord would have them say was actually just quote him, right? I'd love for someone to do the stats on just how many times he was quoted and by who, because it was incredible to see this kind of massive amount of people all quoting the current prophet. I don't think I've ever heard anything like it.
My instinct is they quote each other and him 10 times more than they quote scriptures.
Yeah.
And that's a massive change since we were kids. I think it is.
What do you reckon, Doug?
Bring it on.
Lots of scriptures have been kind of cast to the side so they could quote. I just feel like that this is a symptom of hero worship, prophet worship, whatever you want to call it, and that it's really bad medicine for the church. We struggle to get our membership to focus on Christ as it is, And here we take this person and we basically, even though we may not mean to, but we're kind of putting him up ahead of Christ. And when the general authorities get up and all they do is just praise him and talk about all these wonderful things he did, I mean, they may feel generally, sincere about what they're saying. But what that's teaching the membership is something different. It's like, oh, yeah, he's prophet. Every word he says is God's word and he's infallible. And, the membership takes it to the extreme. You can't tell the members, oh, this guy speaks for God. The next thing it's like, he speaks for God and he's totally infallible. Membership they add on to it. It's just human nature. You embellish, right? That's how, some of these pagan religions have been, you went up with giant headdresses and stuff like that. It's like, okay, it's because they just kept embellishing and embellishing. And we're kind of doing the same thing when it comes to the presence of the church, to the prophet. And we say, that they're not infallible, but we certainly treat them as if they are.
Well, and they say that they're not fallible, that they're infallible. So, Russell M. Nelson said to a group of primary children, do you know what the word prophet means? It means he speaks for God. And so God loves you and won't let me lead you astray.
Yeah. And we have absolute concrete evidence. We have examples where that's happened in the past.
Well, he overrode the previous prophet who delivered a major victory for Satan with the I'm a Mormon campaign.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah, just one prophet back,
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So,
but anyway,
the thing I want
to... That's a precedent for then throwing him under the bus. He's made that easy now.
And Bednar probably will, I reckon.
Yeah. Well, I don't, some of them are, there are a number of things he's initiated that the others are not backing up, and Oakes as well. Oakes will get thrown as the bus fast once he's had his turn, because none of them are matching his rhetoric about the proclamation on the family. He is fighting that one on his own. So I think they know that the tide is going to turn, and they're just doing everything they can to make it hold as long as possible after their death. But they've already modeled completely U-turning the whole vibe of the church. Yeah. So if you do that to your predecessors, the next people can do that to you.
And like Priest of the Dispatches put in the comments, he said they've just normalized these changes. They've made it so we just we don't bother about it now.
Yeah.
They can just sneak them right under us because we've just got so used to it. And I wonder whether this was Russ M. Nelson's game plan when he said, take your vitamin pills, get your rest, it's going to be exciting, change and change and change. Whether he's just inoculated us to change by changing the name of the church, changing the logo, restoring the name of the church. But you know what I mean? Whether all these small changes to the temple, changes to church itself and the structure, whether all of that is just to get us so used to stuff changing that we won't question things when they change.
People will get change fatigue. Each time they do that, they lose credibility. They are paying a high price for this, and this is what they don't realize. They're just making it more comfortable for themselves to make changes without ever having to explain themselves, which they just don't anymore.
Can I say
changing the example? It's not like sacrament cups. Go, Doug.
Oh,
Go, Doug.
Just in general, the other thing that President Nelson got into, and I was following along on a blog on Facebook that everybody just kind of live comments, and it's kept very appropriate and polite and things like that. But he got into the sad heaven thing, and that if you don't do everything right, you're not going to be there with your family. He kind of threw the part member families under the bus again, and just the cry of anguish that went up on that Facebook group. It was just immediate. It's like, this is really going to help my relationship with my non-member husband, and I just don't know if sometimes they have thought through the implications of what they're saying, the ripple down effect that these kinds of things can have. And it's really kind of sad to me, that you would literally have a group of people, rather than say, oh, listen to these great words from the prophet, say, oh my gosh, now I'm going to have to face my husband, who's going to be devastated because he's in the other room watching conference,
Yeah.
And
it is, and it's the human cost.
Take a gun and boom.
Yeah, it's the human cost that I'm certainly most concerned with. This is where me and Peter differ slightly. Not to say Peter's not concerned with this. Peter's very much concerned with saving the institutional church. I'm less fussed about that. My only focus, whereas he has many, my only focus is the human cost of this, is the people that get hurt by this rhetoric. And it needs to stop, because it's ruining families. They're talking about all this suffering and tragedy, not realizing that they're the ones that are propagating a lot of it. And it really hurts people.
And I mean, 50% of the church, 50% of the church is single.
Yes, 50% of adult members of the church are single.
How could you have a message that basically focuses in on this one sliver of your membership and leave out this other huge group? Another thing that he said was he said, well, if you're in a part member marriage, go ahead and get your endowment out. And I can tell you from personal experience of working with people in my ward, part member families, that is not good advice. I know a lot of ladies who they did that in my stake for a while, encouraged these ladies to get their endowments, and the friction it caused in their marriages. And we had divorces, we had all kinds of issues. They just are not thinking it all the way through, and they're not listening to what's happening.
They're in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. They think they know it all. They're being told by their predecessors, here, take the throne. You know it all now. Every thought you have is a revelation from God. You don't need to change anything. And, we'll give you the second anointing, so your exaltation is guaranteed. You've made it. So how are they going to think there's any other path than the one they lived through personally to get to exaltation? Because they're already there in their heads. They think they've already become gods, basically. Or
the second anointing is not helping that.
No,
because It's reinforcing that.
No consequence. No consequence.
To the point, and their youth and first marriages were in the 1940s and 1950s, middle class Utah, which is an extremely specific moment, and they think that's how things always were, and it wasn't, and it hasn't been since. So we're all living with this, and it's that wall around them, it's disconnecting them from reality. But we got the steady beat of Babylon's band.
Oh yes,
President Nelson.
Steady beat of Babylon's. I felt personally called out. I think we should start a band.
I think we should.
I know, but everyone's going to start one now. There's going to be hundreds of Mormon and ex-Mormon bands called Babylon's Band.
Yeah.
But yes, let's get in there first.
Absolutely.
Quick, get the domain name.
So
all about the domain names.
Because then they'll try and buy it up later, and you know how much they'll pay for it. So cool. That is the Sunday. I keep getting that wrong. That is the Sunday evening session of General Conference. Ended up with the announcements of 13 temples, and basically nothing else. So no real revelation. Nothing. The world didn't change.
Well, that's something we haven't really commented, that Nelson built up in the previous session, that he was about to say something momentous about temples, where he's getting everyone used to the idea of change. The first 2/3 of that talk sounded like there's a huge punchline, and there was nothing. There was literally nothing other than keep going to the temple.
I'll tell you what he did do that was big about temples, right? I've just noticed this. He mentioned that there would be a temple in Taiwan. Now, the Chinese government will not like that. If they were ever even on board, if they were ever on board at the first place with a temple on mainland China, then the president of an organization they're dealing with, recognizing Taiwan's sovereignty by not calling it Republic of China, will get it. It's just, he's flawed that. He's diplomatically ruined it, as far as I can see from the outside.
And he's meant to be the China expert, because
he's the one that speaks Mandarin, because he's got perfect pitch, and he operated on an opera star or whatever it was.
But that doesn't hack it. And again, it's this delusion of their own abilities, which being far beyond what it is, because they're not realistic, because they don't engage with the real world, they don't understand the real world, and they're just, causing mayhem everywhere. So poor Taiwan's probably going to get invaded any minute now because of that, bless them. But very important. Significant.
Cool. So final thoughts, everyone. Let's start with you, Peter, and then we'll go to Doug. And then we'll sign off.
My final thought is actually in a sense, what we've talked about here is all a repetition of the same old dysfunctions, completely alienating the people in faith crisis, pretending to offer them answers, but absolutely getting it all wrong, and not indicating in any way that they've even begun to understand what those people are really experiencing and why. The doubling down on the exact obedience to the covenant path that hardly anyone can actually live by, especially in Tennessee and Britain, where we're not living in Utah, where everything is subsidized by this massive wealth donation from taxpayers. Someone commented about the BYU thing. The average, this isn't even the top end of the scale, the average cost of university in America is $30,000 a year. And we halve that with subsidies so that the BYU students only pay $15,000. That's how heavily the international church subsidizes the lifestyle that these people then expect all of us to imitate. And we've just heard that lifestyle again and again taught as the only life path you can have. We simply can't afford to do it. Give up. Still, they were talking about having children young and things like that. We can't afford to do that. But for me, actually, the most important talk of all was Brad Wilcox's earlier in one of the earlier sessions. Now, he just lied to Britain recently. He did a presentation at a Stained Steak or something in a Zoom where he said that all atheists will just turn on you in a crisis and trample you, and it's only people who believe in God. And he totally misrepresented some research to claim that's what it said, which he didn't. So he's not been my popular guy. I might have to like him now, because he gave a powerful talk that, if this is what had been taught when I was a kid, would have completely changed my experience of the church. We had that, we were on Priesthood Dispatches or you were interviewing priests at Dispatches about his life experience, and we were discussing the intense sexual shaming of young people over all kinds of stuff. And Brad Wilcox has finally realized that's a disaster. And he taught, we were taught, if you are still struggling with the sin, you just need to repent of it. It's that easy. And still our leaders keep thinking, just decide to be good, decide to stop being gay, decide not to watch pornography. It will be fixed overnight. And we were specifically taught in seminary and other places, if you commit the sin again that you repented of previously, that repentance is erased and all the previous times you committed that sin come back at you. And this has been one of the biggest mental dysfunctions laid upon the youth of the church. And Brad dealt with it. He said, you are not a hypocrite because you have had a habit you are trying to break. You are a hypocrite if you hide it from your leaders. So that wasn't so good. He still wants us to confess everything. But the punchline really was, considering how in his sort of example of Damon, who's been struggling with pornography and kept going back to it and felt useless and demoralized, which is what we've all been through. Considering how long Damon had struggled, this is powerful. It was unhelpful and unrealistic for parents and leaders assisting him to say never again, to quickly or arbitrarily set some standard of worthiness to be considered worthy. This is what every bishop in the world is doing all the time.
It's almost opening the space to say, because at the moment we have the problem in Mormonism where even a little bit of sin is not viewed as progress. So if you've got a problem with a habit of something you're doing, even saying, well, I'm going to cut it back, like most people do when they're quitting smoking or whatever, that is unacceptable. But this talk seems to create the space for that. It seems to create the space for saying, well, we can't just expect cold turkey. Let's see what we can do about reducing bad behavior rather than just trying to eliminate it.
Yeah. So he said instead, they started with small, reachable goals. They got rid of all or nothing. They got rid of the all or nothing expectations and instead focused on incremental growth, which enabled Damon to build on a series of successes rather than failures, to prosper by degrees. I'm going to make a meme. That'll be my second ever conference meme. The last one was Uchtdorf. That needs to be, this is the hope for saving our church's youth. If they actually practice that, it would entirely transform everything about how our young people are shamed into the mincing machine that damages them. Most of our young people leave as young teenagers when they first start encountering this system. He has understood its dysfunction and he's offered hope. And I just hope everyone embraces that and makes that the way our church functions now.
Go make a meme.
Brad's got it.
Go make that meme.
Spread that around.
Doug, what were your final thoughts?
I love that. This is one of the most important moments for years if that becomes our thing.
And I really appreciate that, Peter. I think you're right on with that. I really do. It was a turning point. We heard something new there. For me, just the whole conference, I think Elder Suarez knocked it out of the park with his talk about compassion and Christ-like love. It was just beautiful. It was the most Christ-centered talk to me, truly, genuinely Christ-centered. And he wore a plaid suit, which I was just thrilled about. Like, okay, break the mold,
Excellent.
Be a rebel. So there are some other good talks. Uchtdorf's was pretty good. I thought Renlin's talk was good. Stress test, that one was good. He made some important points there. But I think also overall the themes of the sad heaven and doubt is bad, and the world is this evil place that's going to eat you alive, so hide under your bed and only go to the church website and only shop at Deseret Book and listen to conference talks every day, and they get into this thing where it's like it's really this kind of dystopian mind control thing. You're like, wait, can't I just be a normal person and love God and have a testimony? And why do I have to be terrified of the internet? It's the greatest information tool ever devised. And you can, as long as you're mature about it, then then you're fine. So rather than teach people skills, it's like, let's teach you how to surf the internet, and be safe about it. They just give this boogeyman speech. Mm-hmm. And I don't like the boogeyman aspect of it. And we see that every conference, and the world is horrible and evil and then the sad heaven thing and all the people who basically aren't, in perfect heterosexual, heteronormative families are doomed. That's a horrible message when half your church is or more is not in that situation. So I think it's just a shame that their message is so off cue on some of these really important points. And then the other one that I don't think will ever be addressed in General Conference is that they complain about people doubting, but they never answer the questions that make people doubt. Mm-hmm. There's never a direct address. They leave it up to the Midnight Mormons and the fair people and these clowns who try to generate a smokescreen for the church, to put forth an answer. As Dallin Oaks said in his speech, we don't care if you have good answers. We only care if you have answers. Mm-hmm. I mean, he literally admitted that that's what's happening. So you have that going on, and people's questions go unanswered day after day, week after week, year after year. And that's why people are just leaving the church, because they never get the answer from the church.
Well said.
It from a periphery, but you've never seen an apostle stand up and say, let me answer this question, this hard question. I'm going to take you through it, and you're going to know at the end the truth. You never see that.
No.
And I don't think you ever will.
I don't think you will. We saw in a talk where they said this guy had 3 questions and he sent them in a letter to his friends. We never find out what those questions were.
Yeah, worst questions.
And the solution was emotional and spiritual. He went up
exactly.
to his room and
the solution was not factual.
Yeah, right. Well, throw them away, and I feel good about it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Doug, for that. That was epic. I've been really glad to have you on. There's a lot of love for you in the comments. A lot of people.
They don't know me very well, do they?
And Peter, as always, a lot of love for you in the comments as well. I'd say, Doug, tell us where to find you, but actually, you may appreciate the anonymity of no one finding you. I don't know where you're at with the internet.
You will find me on Facebook.
Yeah, he's always in the comment section of our videos, always giving really good insights. So come to the live streams just for Doug in the comments. Peter, you'll find him at Mormon Civil War. Yeah, he's alone sometimes because I'm not that popular. So come keep him company. Peter is in Mormon Civil War. Go check out his YouTube channel. There's a link below. He is excellent. And I'll just keep clowning around doing what I do on my channel. And I'll keep
awesome and wonderful.
Avoiding excommunication perpetually. They'll never get me. I'm like a ninja. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I've really enjoyed looking over this conference weekend. I hope this has made conference weekend good for some of you. And from all of us, thank you very much, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye. Bye.